are three tiers of response. One would be that one that went after facilities or personnel of the group which the U.S. Has identified and which has claimed responsibility for the instant attack. The second would be a wider attack on a range of Iranian-supported groups that have participated in this attack and others. And a third would be an attack on facilities in Iran itself, specifically the drone factories that produce the drones that all the indications are the drone that attacked that was used to attack the U.S. base was produced by Iran. And additionally, these drones are being used very heavily by Russia against Ukrainian targets. The shipment of the drones to Ukraine is clearly an act that the U.S. is very opposed. And so there are many voices here that are saying that the U.S. should attack those bases in Iran. However, an attack on Iran, on Iranian soil itself, risks escalation into an open conflict between the U.S. and Iran.
The Biden administration has held a series of briefings tonight, warning that it will respond decisively to the drone attack on a U.S. military base near the Syria-Jordan border that killed 3 American troops. 40 others were injured. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has accused militia backed by Iran of carrying out the attack. And he said President Biden is weighing options on how to respond.
From the outset, we've been very clear in warning that anyone looking to take advantage of conflict in the Middle East and try to expand it, don't do it. We've taken steps to defend ourselves and to defend our partners, as well as to prevent escalation. And the President's been crystal clear. We will respond decisively to any aggression. And we will hold responsible the people who attacked our troops. We'll do so at a time and a place of our choosing. At the same time, we remain focused on our core objectives in the region, both in terms of the conflict in Gaza and broader efforts.
Well, those remarks there from the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken echoed those of the National Security Advisor John Kirby. He dismissed questions about the political calculations as the president decides how to respond.
The president has the authority to defend those troops in those facilities, and he'll do that.
Is weighing all of his options. This is an election year. Is the president looking at his polling when he's weighing all of these options? Is the president looking at what?
My goodness, that's a heck of a question. He's not looking, ma'am, let me just stop you right there. The commander-in-chief is not looking at polling or considering the electoral calendar when he's defending.
How they feel about the war on Gaza?
Oh, now, can I answer the question? He's not looking at political calculations or the polling or the electoral calendar as he works to protect our troops ashore and our ships at sea. And any suggestion to the contrary is offensive.
But Donald Trump, who's on course to take on Joe Biden in the presidential election, warned Biden has left the world on the brink of World War III.
We've been right about almost everything. Do you ever see that? Trump is right about everything. I hope I'm not right about World War III, because you're very close to World War III. I'm not predicting it, but I'm saying you're very close. We have a man negotiating for us who can't put 2 sentences together. He can't see the stage. He can't find the stairs to get off the stage.
Well, that was Donald Trump speaking at the weekend. David Sedney is a former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Afghanistan, Pakistan and Central Asia under the Obama administration. David, good evening to you.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Good to speak to you. We heard there from both the National Security Advisor, John Kirby, from the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. They're all making it very clear that there is going to be some form of US response to this attack and the deaths of those 3 US soldiers.
Yes, they have made it clear that it's going to be a serious response. Over the past 4 months, there have been well over 100 attacks on that have involved U.S. Facilities or U.S. personnel in various places in the Middle East. As far as I know, all of them linked to groups that support Iran. Most visibly, of course, have been the attacks by the Houthis on shipping in the Red Sea. administration has admitted that its response there has not been effective in stopping those attacks. So in order to be effective in creating deterrence against even more attacks, the response to these attacks has to be firm and decisive.
Of course, this was an attack on a US base. We've been getting more details of that. I mean, what sort of response do you think we should expect from the United States?
Would say there are three tiers of response. One would be that one that went after facilities or personnel of the group which the U.S. Has identified and which has claimed responsibility for the instant attack. The second would be a wider attack on a range of Iranian-supported groups that have participated in this attack and others. And a third would be an attack on facilities in Iran itself, specifically the drone factories that produce the drones that all the indications are the drone that attacked the that was used to attack the U.S. base was produced by Iran. And additionally, these drones are being used very heavily by Russia against Ukrainian targets. The shipment of the drones to Ukraine is clearly an act that the U.S. is very opposed. And so there are many voices here that are saying that the U.S. should attack those bases in Iran. However, an attack on Iran, on Iranian soil itself, risk escalation into an open conflict between the U.S. and Iran, something that neither the U.S. nor Iran wants. But the Iranians have been steadily escalating what they've been doing. And if the U.S. only responds in kind with a fairly minor attack against a minor group, that is not only not likely to deter Iran in the future, but it may well encourage it. So many people in the U.S. are pushing for a firm attack, including on some of the Iranian facilities in Iran.
Yeah, I mean, we heard from John Kirby, the national security spokesman, saying, we don't want a war with Iran. But if the US were to take that direct action on facilities on Iranian soil, that surely would lead the US closer, if not into, a direct conflict with Iran.
Well, that, of course, would be a decision for Iran to make. The argument on the other side is without taking this step, we're just in an escalatory spiral that's going to result in the same position anyway. In the last administration, when they carried out the attack that killed the Iranian general in Iraq, the U.S. accompanied that attack with very firm messages that it was not interested in a war and that this was a one-time event and that both sides needed to be very careful and step back. And in that case, they did. So I would say that any attack that included an attack on Iran would likely include some very clear messages to Iran that we don't want escalation, but at the same time, the U.S. can't be afraid of escalation. Iran can't try and push the escalation button in order to get what it wants. These are very, very dangerous times and a very difficult set of decisions for President Biden.
We heard John Kirby, the national security spokesman there, dismissing questions over the political calculations that would weigh into this decision. But as you have mentioned there, you've already got some figures, Republican senators largely saying, look, we should be hitting Iran. It's no good just carrying out the sort of attacks that we've had so far on, for example, the proxy groups, the Houthis operating out of Yemen. We've seen previous attacks on other Iranian-backed militias in the region. How much do you think that political pressure, with Donald Trump openly accusing him of being a weak president, do you think that that does weigh into this decision?
Actually, I'm with John Kirby on this. John Kirby, the National Security Council press spokesman, in what he said earlier. The response as president of the United States, as commander in chief, and as essentially the main actor on the world stage, has to be firm and decisive. And the President Biden, 10 days ago, in response to questioning, made clear he understood that the attacks on the Houthis had not been that way. And it's not just Republicans who are pushing for a stronger response. It's people across the range of the national security firmament. So I don't think this is a Republican versus Democrat thing at all. President Biden has shown in the past that he's prepared to take decisive action when necessary. Not everybody agrees with the actions he's taken, such as a withdrawal from Afghanistan, but his support for Ukraine has drawn him wide bipartisan support. So I don't think politics are a major factor here. I mean, politics are always exist, but this is a situation where what's most important is the effect, and the effect has to be to stop these attacks by the Iranian-linked groups across the board, not just in the one instance here.
These militia groups are drawing clear links with what is happening in Gaza, Israel continuing its military offensive there. We've also got, as the president weighs up how to respond to this attack on a US base, talks going on to try to secure the release of more Israeli and American hostages being held by Hamas. And we've had direct warnings from Qatar, which is acting as an important mediator in all of this, that attacks on Iran could just derail any progress that has been made towards a deal for a hostage release. I mean, that just adds to the complexity of all this, doesn't it?
Very much so. The talks on the release of the hostages and a possible short-term ceasefire in Gaza are things that that the administration, the president, very much want, as do those who have family members who are being held hostage, and there are many reasons that all of us would like to see the conflict in Gaza wound down and the deaths of civilians ended. However, really, this is the case. Iran may not direct all of these groups, but it certainly has influence, and it has not yet to exercise any influence to stop these attacks. It's providing the arms, it's providing the training, it's providing the guidance for the groups that are involved here. So it's really up to the Iranians. The Qataris are correct that a U.S. attack, including one on Iran, could have an impact. But at the same time, if the U.S. doesn't respond, things could escalate anyway. So really, it's a delicate but important decision for President Biden. But I and many others believe it has to be a firm and tough set of actions that lay down a marker that any more escalation risks the kind of conflict that Iran doesn't want.
Just finally, let me ask you about that decision taken initially by the US, followed by the UK, now a number of other countries, including Germany, Italy, to suspend funding to UNRWA, the UN agency that is virtually the only agency that is operating and delivering humanitarian aid and supplies in Gaza. Now, this decision has been taken because of allegations that some of the UNRWA staff were actually involved in those October the 7th attacks. Is there nonetheless, this is going to be seen in particular by the Palestinian activists, those backing the Palestinian citizens in Gaza, as the US taking sides and just making the abject humanitarian crisis in Gaza even worse?
There certainly is that risk, but the role of UNRWA and its personnel in the past and its willingness to work with Hamas is something that's been questioned. The apparent involvement of UNRWA staff as participants and facilitators of the attacks in October against Israel is something that UNRWA itself should have addressed and needs to address. And if UNRWA is taking sides in this conflict, then it's not going to be able to get the kind of funding that it needs, and the U.S. and other countries will have to look for alternate means, NGOs or other means, to get the relief to Palestinians that the U.S. is really determined to send there.
David Sedney, former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Central Asia during the Obama administration. Great to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.